So if Dominic LeBlanc is out of the race, and it's not maybe a guarantee that he is, because we've spoken to a number of MPs who want him to reconsider, who is still mulling a bid. Let me show you a list of who we know for sure. Chrystia Freeland, of course, who quit cabinet in spectacular fashion just about 3 weeks ago. Former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney. Labour Minister and Gatineau MP Steve McKinnon. François-Philippe Champagne, the Minister of Industry. Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister. Karina Gould, the government's House Leader. Christy Clark, the former Premier of British Columbia. And Frank Baylis, who's the only person at this point to say he is officially in. There's one more face on that graphic that you see on your screen, and that's the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson. I had a chance to sit down with Minister Wilkinson to talk about his purported candidacy and when he's going to decide whether he's in or out of that race. Have a listen to our conversation. Hi, Minister. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
I appreciate you making the time.
Not at all. It's a busy time.
It is, very much so. Why are you considering a run for this leadership?
Well, look, I had thought a little bit about it. I have not been organizing at all. I respect the role of the Prime Minister, and certainly I respected his decision on Monday of this week. But I have had a range of caucus and cabinet colleagues who've come to me and asked me to consider running, and in that context, I am considering it. I've been having conversations with lots of folks. I think it's time that we had a Prime Minister and a leader of the Liberal Party that's a little bit more focused on the economy and on business. I spent 25 years in the business community, many of those years as the Chief Executive Officer of companies. And I do think that there needs to be a heightened focus on the economy moving forward.
What are the key determinants that you will base your decision on? Is it, for example, something as simple as the rules of the race, the cutoff fee, or is it more about whether or not you think you can win?
I think it's a little bit about all of those. I want to see what the rules look like. Certainly those folks that may have been organizing for some period of time are advantaged in a short leadership race, and it needs to be a short leadership race. And so in that context, I think it's important to ensure that there is sufficient support, not only in caucus, but with organizers across the country, to make it reasonable to think that you will be competitive in that race. And that's important for me because the alternative for me is actually also a good one. Like, I'm a key part of the Cabinet Committee working on the American issue, which has become perhaps even more challenging over the last couple of days. As a Canadian, I think it's important that we actually continue to focus on that. And so for me, it's not an easy decision to go one way or the other. If I decide not to run, I will continue to work very hard, as I will next week when I'm in Washington. So.
And don't worry, I have lots of questions about about the Trump file, so to speak, in a moment. On the leadership, do you have a date by which you're going to make that decision?
Well, given the time frame for the leadership as a whole, I would think that any candidate that's thinking of getting in needs to do so probably within a week or two at the absolute latest.
And have you decided, if you do ultimately end up throwing your hat in the ring, whether you would step aside from your portfolio in cabinet?
Well, that's a conversation that the National Board's going to have as to whether people will be required to step aside.
What do you feel based on your own principles?
So again, I'm a little bit torn because what I would say is there's important work that needs to be done, and it would I would be regretting the not being involved in the conversation. I think I have pretty good relationships with all of the provinces, including with folks like Daniel Smith and Scott Moe, who we don't always agree on issues, and it's important to be having those conversations. I'm one of the folks that actually does have the ability to have those conversations. So stepping aside from that entirely would be difficult. That being said, you would have to be very careful about what conflicts would exist for folks who stay in the race and can use their ministerial portfolio to their advantage. And so, I can sort of argue at both sides. I think the National Board is going to have to take all of that under consideration and to try to actually make a prudent decision and put frameworks around it.
When you talk about, as a candidate, someone who would focus more on business and more on the economy, how do you convince Canadians you have the ability to do that when you have your record, your government's record, to kind of stack up against?
Well, I guess I would say a couple things. I mean, the first is, as a cabinet minister, you are collectively responsible for all of the decisions that are made, and any candidate that was a cabinet minister can't walk away from the decisions that were made under Prime Minister Trudeau. Nor would I want to. I was a participant in those conversations. But that being said, the Prime Minister is actually more than a minister. The Prime Minister sets the overall orientation and the emphasis of government. And certainly as a Prime Minister, you can change some of the emphasis as you move forward. My background in business, I think, gives me perhaps a bit of a different perspective than this Prime Minister, but also than Mr. Poilievre, who has never worked in business in his entire life. So I do think there are opportunities to move us forward. I would also say that I think I have been relatively successful in the energy and resources space in advancing the economic conversation, particularly as it relates to the energy transition.
Do you think that's true when you think about the number of legal challenges, for example, pursued by both Alberta and Saskatchewan, the fervor with which they have opposed the policies that your government has put in place? Like, I'm thinking of the message that you'd be delivering to Canadians writ large, and you have your government's record to stack up against, which is not necessarily one of national unity around resources.
Well, I would tell you there are certainly areas of disagreement. That's usually on the regulatory side. In terms of the work that I have been doing in energy and natural resources, there's actually a lot of commonality. We work together on advancing critical minerals. We've worked together on nuclear power. We've worked together on advancing renewables. We've worked together on biofuels. We've worked together on hydrogen. And that very much includes Saskatchewan, Alberta, and other provinces with whom sometimes we have disagreements.
But what about the emissions cap? What about the carbon tax? Are those policies that you would stand by? Because those are not policies that those two provinces agree with.
Well, certainly on the price on pollution or the carbon tax, there are two components of it, right? The industrial component of it, which is over 80% of the emissions, they do actually agree with it. I mean, Alberta was the first province
let me
to put in place.
I'm asking about the consumer side of the carbon tax, the one that's politically, a firestorm.
Well, it's politically a firestorm, although I will say that in the aftermath of the government doing a better job of communicating around the rebate, the numbers actually, from a polling perspective, look a lot different than they did 6 months ago. I mean, at the end of the day, what I would say is I have a commitment to climate action. I think I showed that when I was Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I got into politics because I was concerned about climate change and the world we were leaving to our children. And I think there are ways to address the climate issue in a manner that can actually enhance economic growth and prosperity as we move forward. I think my record on that actually quite speaks for itself. And I have been, as I say, pretty successful in actually working even covertly with some of the provinces. The Alberta Canada Working Group table that we set up, which is the Regional Energy and Resource Table, but with a different name, because one has to be thoughtful and flexible with respect to each province's aspirations. We actually worked quite a lot on the clean electricity regulation with Alberta, and we incorporated a lot of their comments in the final thing. And
they still don't want it.
Well, but at the end of the day, did you hear how Danielle Smith reacted to it? She said, "Thank you. You've actually extended it to 2050." And while it's not perfect, it's a lot better than what it was. That's probably as good as you're going to get.
So I totally take your point on all of that, but that doesn't answer the question about whether or not you, as leader of the Liberal Party and ultimately Prime Minister, would continue to pursue both an emissions cap on the oil and gas sector and the consumer portion of the carbon tax. Will you?
So the consumer portion of the carbon price, I will continue to make the argument to Canadians that actually it enhances our ability to address climate change, and it does so in a manner that's affordable. And actually, it is an affordability measure. Like, if Mr. Poilievre is aspiring to take away the rebates and the price on pollution, it is going to make people who live on modest incomes poorer in this country. So yes, I am committed to that. In terms of the cap, we are certainly having conversations all the time. At the end of the day, what I want to see is emissions go down in every sector of the economy. That needs to include the oil and gas sector. And I'm open to conversations about what tools you use to actually get there.
When it comes to the final question on this, on the affordability, I understand your point about the rebates, but I think Canadians are confused about the purpose with which your government views this policy. Like, was it meant to actually reduce the effects of climate change or emissions more specifically, or was it meant to redistribute income, which you already have a lot of programs that you're doing? Like, which is it? And when you talk about it becoming more popular, maybe on a singular basis, but your party's overall polling numbers have done nothing but go down.
Well, again, certainly there have been challenges from a polling perspective for the party generally, and I think there are a number of causes for that. I don't think that's singularly linked to the carbon price. And I think if you actually dig in and look at polling on the carbon price itself, the numbers have changed substantially as we've been better at communicating the rebate. But I would say it is a mechanism through which you fight climate change. That's the fundamental point of a price on pollution. How you then take the money and deal with it is a second question. And what we've chosen to do is to give it back in a manner that ensures that people are kept whole. It also ensures that there is some redistributive effect. But by and large, the vast majority of Canadians, other than those who have a 6,000 square foot house and drive a Hummer and have a big boat, are paying less.
Or farmers, or Indigenous people, or
Well,
small
farmers-
businesses,
farmers
all
have-
of which you just after 6 years finally gave the rebate to be fair.
Farmers have a specific rebate.
That they
and-
just got.
Yeah, and the Indigenous rebate has been enhanced.
Okay, I want to move on because I only have a few minutes left, and I want to ask you about that trip to Washington, more specifically in your capacity as Minister of Energy, and this threat from Donald Trump, not just for tariffs, but talking about annexation. It's gotten, it was already serious, it's gotten very serious. I wanted to know as far as what Canada's response might be if your government is prepared to put an export tax on something like oil.
So I would just say President-elect Trump's comments yesterday, I think, are not becoming of a leader of a G7 country. Canada is the United States' best friend, and we are their largest and best trading partner. There certainly are areas where we can continue to improve the collaboration and the cooperation, including on borders, but those kinds of statements are entirely unhelpful. I would say that if the Americans do decide to put in place tariffs, that Canada will need to respond, and we are in the process of developing the responsive list. That list will certainly be focused on looking to extract the greatest amount of pain in the United States to ensure that there is pressure put on President Trump to withdraw them. But I am also of the view that the tariffs are not inevitable.
You're of that view? What gives you that sense at this point?
Because I think there are ways in which to have a conversation with the Trump administration, with senators, with American business, around ways in which we can help them with the agenda that he articulated during his campaign. That includes reducing dependence on China for things like critical minerals. It includes actually assisting him with energy dominance, which requires the export of Canadian gas and oil.
Haven't you been doing that, though, with all due respect, for the last 2 months? And all that's happened is the rhetoric has gotten worse.
No, I don't think that we have been doing that for the past 2 months. Though one of the reasons why I'm going down there is to talk very specifically about specific types of projects that we could actually work on together that would help them with their objectives and would also benefit Canada. Look, at the end of the day, we should be thinking about how we can best collaborate to combat threats to North America, like China, which is an existential threat in the future. We can help. And we can work together to actually ensure that we are effectively addressing the Chinese threat and other threats around the world. And I am not, by any stretch, pessimistic that we can't get there.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Minister, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.